In the fall of 2015, a man named Michael, who worked as a long-haul truck driver, was on his usual route across the countryside. He had driven these roads for years and had become accustomed to the long, lonely hours on the road. The truck stops were few and far between, but he was used to the isolation. He didn't mind it. It gave him time to think, listen to music, and enjoy the peace of the open road. One night, Michael found himself driving down a stretch of highway that was known for being especially desolate. It was well after midnight, and there was barely any traffic on the road. The truck's headlights cut through the thick darkness, and all he could hear was the sound of the engine and the tires humming against the pavement. As he drove, Michael noticed a strange, flickering light in his rearview mirror. It wasn't the usual reflection of another vehicle's headlights, it was more erratic and unsteady. Curious and slightly unnerved, Michael glanced over his shoulder to see what it was. To his shock, he saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, dressed in a long white gown, her face obscured by long, wet hair. She was just standing there, motionless, staring at the truck. The strange thing was, she was standing in a place where no one would normally be. There were no homes or buildings for miles. Michael slowed down as he passed the woman, trying to get a better look. But before he could, he heard a faint knock on the window. Startled, he looked to his side. To his horror, there was the same woman, now sitting in the passenger seat next to him. Her face was pale, her hair still covering her face, but Michael could see her eyes now, wide, hollow, and unblinking. He froze, not knowing what to do. The woman didn't speak or move, she just stared ahead, her breath coming in slow, labored gasps. Michael's heart raced. He slammed on the brakes, pulling the truck over to the side of the road. He looked to his right, but the passenger seat was now empty. The woman was gone. His hands shook as he tried to catch his breath, convinced that he had just imagined the whole thing. After a few minutes, he decided to continue his drive, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. But as he started up the engine, a strange noise filled the cabin, a low, guttural whisper. The voice was soft, almost unintelligible, but it was definitely there. He looked around, his eyes darting from the rearview mirror to the road ahead, but he couldn't see anything unusual. The whisper grew louder, and then, clear as day, he heard a voice say, "You shouldn't have stopped." Michael's blood ran cold. He slammed on the brakes again and jumped out of the truck, looking around frantically. There was no sign of the woman. The highway stretched out into the dark, empty landscape, but Michael felt like something was watching him. He got back into the truck and tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and stalled. The whispering voice continued to echo in his ears. "You shouldn't have stopped. Now you're mine." Panic set in. Michael tried to turn the key again, but the truck refused to start. He could feel the temperature drop inside the cabin, and the air grew thick with tension. He was no longer alone. The woman's presence was suffocating, and he could feel her staring at him from the darkness. Suddenly, the truck's engine roared to life on its own. The headlights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the road. As Michael drove down the highway, his hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He could feel the woman's gaze burning into the back of his head. Every now and then, he would catch a glimpse of her face in the rearview mirror, her pale, ghostly eyes staring back at him. He drove for what felt like hours, the whispering voice growing louder and more insistent. Finally, when the sun began to rise, Michael pulled into the nearest truck stop, exhausted and terrified. He looked around, hoping to see other drivers, but the place was eerily quiet. It was as if the night had never happened. He stepped out of the truck, his legs weak and unsteady. As he walked toward the diner, he overheard a conversation between two truckers. "Hey, you ever heard about that woman on the highway up north?" one of them asked. "Yeah, I heard she's been haunting that stretch for years," the other replied. "They say if you stop, you're never seen again." Michael's heart skipped a beat as he listened, his blood running cold. He knew he had encountered something supernatural that night. And to this day, he has never driven that stretch of highway again. The memory of the phantom passenger, her cold, hollow eyes and her warning, haunts him every time he gets behind the wheel. No one knows who the woman was or why she appears to truck drivers in the dead of night. But one thing is for certain, she's always there, waiting for her next victim. And once you stop, you may never leave. The Haunted Hotel on Route 66, a true horror story. This story takes us back to the summer of 1983, when Ben Carson, a truck driver, found himself lost on his long journey down Route 66. It was late at night, and he was struggling to find his destination. As he drove along the deserted road, he spotted an old hotel with a dim light shining from inside. He decided to stop and rest there for the night. Ben knocked on the door, and an elderly woman answered. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes held something strange. Without a word, she motioned for him to come inside and gave him a room. Ben entered the room, which looked dusty and aged. The walls had peeling paint, and a musty odor filled the air. But the strangest thing in the room was the old clock hanging on the wall. The clock was frozen at 3:15, its hands stuck in place. Ben shrugged it off, thinking it was just a broken clock, and went about his business. That night, as Ben tried to sleep, he felt an eerie silence surrounding him. But the silence was soon broken by the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. When he opened the door to check, no one was there. He tried to sleep again, but the ticking of the clock grew louder, as if it were waiting for something. Ben went out and spoke to a local worker at a nearby gas station, asking about the hotel. The worker told him that the hotel had a dark history. Many years ago, the hotel's owner, Harry, was murdered, and his wife never left the place. After that, the hotel became a place of terror. It was said that anyone who stayed in room 13 never left, and that the clock always stopped at 3:15. Horrified by the story, Ben rushed to leave the room. But as he stepped into the hallway, he noticed something terrifying. The hotel seemed to be shifting, the hallways elongating, and the doors locking themselves. Room 13, the clock, and the whispering voices all began to close in on him. When he opened the door to escape, he found nothing but a suffocating darkness. Eventually, Ben managed to make his way back to his truck and fled the hotel, but the strange hotel was gone. The road was back to normal, and he couldn't find the hotel anywhere. He could never forget that night, and he often said that the hotel existed between two realms, one of reality and one of the supernatural, and that anyone who entered would never leave.